During the battle, George wanted his family to know that he was present, so he actually lobbed a couple shells at his brother's house on York Street and took the chimney of the house off. Hello, I'm Tim Smith with Gettysburg History, and welcome to an episode of Monuments Monday. And today I've selected the 139th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry to discuss. This is a unit that was raised in September 1862. And basically, it's raised in Pittsburgh, and a lot of the men that served in the unit were from Pittsburgh, along with men from Allegheny County, Armstrong County, and Mercer County. So all around the Pittsburgh area. The colonel of the regiment at the Battle of Gettysburg was Frederick Hill Collier, who was actually born in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Collier was accidentally wounded on July 3rd, 1863. If I remember the story correctly, he accidentally shot himself in the leg with his pistol. Not making light of it, because accidents, of course, do happen. This is another of the units that had a large amount of men at the battle. They have 511 men, and their casualties are very light. They have actually 1 man killed in the battle and 19 wounded. Now, 2 of the wounded died later, so they ended up being mortally wounded. And 2 of the 3 men that we're talking about who were killed or mortally wounded are buried in the Soldiers National Cemetery at Gettysburg. I think the 3rd being buried out near Pittsburgh. According to an article about the unit, the 139th Regiment was largely made up of men from this city, from a Pittsburgh newspaper. Judge, then Colonel F.H. Collier, was the colonel. It was mustered in just before September 1862 and left the city a few days subsequently. The members were involved in a burial detail at the Battle of Second Bull Run. And according to this article, this work was very disastrous to them. More than 100 men were prostrated with fever, and a few died. We don't think about men dying because of the conditions on the burial crews after some of these actions. Now, this monument, the 139th Pennsylvania Infantry Memorial, is another one of those monuments that was dedicated on September 11th, 1889, Pennsylvania Day at Gettysburg. And I'd like to mention, I'll talk a little bit about them, but if you're interested in learning more about the role that this unit played in the battle, I recommend an article about the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Division, 6th Army Corps, Colonel David Nevin's brigade, that was written by Gary Edelman in 1994. It's in Gettysburg Magazine number 11, so you can read that. And if I remember correctly, it might be Gary's first article about a Civil War topic. I'll try to get him to put something in the comments below this video, and you can banter with him if you like. You might know on this monument, they have a description of what they did during the battle, and they have a little bit about the regiment and their casualties during the war. And on the back side of the monument, they have a list of the engagements that they were in during the war. As we mentioned often in these videos, this monument is not just a monument to mark the position of battle on July 2nd, 1863, but it's also the monument that honors the soldiers that fought in this unit for their service during the entire portion of the war that they were in service. And you might know that this unit marched from Manchester, Maryland to Gettysburg through the night of July 1st, July 2nd, and arrived here while the fighting was going on. And there's a couple interesting articles about them in the battle. There's an article in the Pittsburgh Evening Chronicle on July 9th, 1863. And according to a member of the 139th, our corps opportunely arrived on the battlefield on the evening of July 2nd, just as the tide of battle was at its height. And after marching 30 miles that day, the 3rd Brigade went into the fight in support of the Pennsylvania Reserves. And as General Wheaton proudly said, did it splendidly. The enemy broke and fled in the wildest confusion. Another account of a member of the 39th, which appeared in the Pittsburgh Evening Chronicle on July 23rd, 1863, said, "Of our long, rapid, and wearisome marches, we commenced peppering the rebels at Gettysburg. Suffice it to mention that within an hour after we completed a march of 36 miles, our brigade was ordered to the front, where matters were exceedingly desperate, and by our own conduct, we saved the fortunes of the day." So it's interesting that they viewed in these articles this moment after they arrived from their lengthy march from Manchester, Maryland, as the turning point of the battle. And you know, they were part of the 6th Army Corps, and they marched from Manchester, Maryland to Gettysburg. And if you read the various accounts, you know, it varies. It's probably about 30 miles. Sometimes we say that they marched 32 miles in 17 hours. That seems to be, depending on where you started from, where you're putting the ending of the march from, that seems to be pretty good. There's a National Tribune article by a member of this regiment that claims that it was a 42-mile march through the night into the next day. And you know, the timely arrival of the 6th Army Corps at Rock Creek allowed General George Gordon Meade to pull the 5th Corps out of reserve and send them into the fighting on the southern end of the battlefield, which had a dramatic effect on the battle. David Nevin's brigade, sometimes you'll see it referred to as Frank Wheaton's brigade. Remember, on July 1st, John Newton had been called to Gettysburg to take command of the 1st Army Corps by General Meade because General Reynolds had been killed. So General Wheaton, who was in charge of the brigade, was in command of the division, and Colonel David Nevin, who's the colonel of the 93rd Pennsylvania, was given brigade command. But this unit arrived after a long march. According to several accounts, Nevin's brigade, with the 139th Pennsylvania in the lead, actually led the march of the 6th Army Corps to Gettysburg. So the dedication ceremony of this monument, again, given on September 11th, 1889, Captain William Herbert had some interesting things to say. And I kind of like some of the speeches, so I wanted to read you his opening. "My old comrades of the 139th Pennsylvania Volunteers, it is with pleasure I greet you this afternoon. And what a great pleasure it is to look into the faces of so many old friends, some of whom we have not met or grasped hands for a score or more of years." You know, a score, referring back to Abraham Lincoln's 4 scores. "And the passing of years has made their imprint on each and every one. Your young and manly beauty if you have ever possessed any, has given place to more rugged and stern features, and the frosty hand of time has touched black, brown, and red locks that you used to wear and given them a silvery tinge. I never saw so many gray heads and bald heads gathered before. I think he's somewhat of a comedian to the men in the unit. I think it's interesting that he makes light of it. He talks a little bit about the fighting, and I thought I'd just give a little overview of it. Without waiting as long as I have taken to relate the incident, we advance, touching elbows on the left with the gallant Pennsylvania reserves, and with exultant cheers, we were soon in the conflict. With well-directed fire and steady line, the enemy reeled and staggered, and soon is driven from our front, discomforted and defeated. The victory is ours. The rebel yell is no longer heard, but the Union cheer, loud and victorious, rolls along the line. As we pushed down the north side of Little Round Top, it was fortunate of Company D to recover 2 brass guns from the hands of some of Longstreet's men who were ready to turn them on our lines. Company D not only got the guns, but captured the Louisiana Tigers who were laying their disloyal hands on them. So a few things. It is a dramatic moment when the Pennsylvania Reserves and Nevin's Brigade marches off the slopes of Little Round Top on both sides of the Wheatfield Road and drives into Longstreet's men as they were attempting to capture Little Round Top. Of course, this is Wofford's brigade from Georgia. It always seems like the Louisiana Tigers are a popular unit to fight against. They're mentioned as being the nemesis of more than one of these units in the battle. But it was Georgians. And according to one account, Longstreet is actually somewhere near Wofford's brigade as they're coming up the Wheatfield Road. And this is, you know, people make light of the fact that not many casualties were suffered by the Pennsylvania Reserves or Nevin's brigade in this advance. But make no doubt about it, the Southerners were pushing up into this area and attempting to attack Little Round Top. And really, it was the sight of this massive amount of men, 2 brigades would be like 3,000 men, that were heading down this hill towards them. And again, the 139 have like 500 men in the battle. So it's not necessarily that there's heavy fighting here, it's that the movement of these troops down into the Valley of Death in front of Little Round Top just caused the Southerners to give up. And they pulled back as soon as these men appeared. So I give credit to the men who were involved in this charge. Also, Captain Aaron Walcott, who's in charge of the 3rd Massachusetts Artillery, just behind the camera, his guns were temporarily overrun or in serious danger of being overrun at this very moment when the 6th Army Corps pushed into this area. And they are responsible for relieving the pressure or recapturing Walcott's guns that are positioned at this location. On July 3rd, they mentioned we halted at the base of Little Round Top, where we now stand, and we remained all the next day, the famous 3rd day of July, ready to repel any attack or execute any command. And they mention that on the 3rd day of the battle, that Confederate sharpshooters, probably from the rise of ground in the Valley of Death, just south of us near Devil's Den, were peppering this unit, and they were ordered to lie prone. And Confederate sharpshooters from a tree line out in front of them were firing into them as well. And on the evening of July 3rd, along with members of the Pennsylvania Reserves, they were ordered forward after Pickett's charge. According to the speech we just talked about, At 6 o'clock that evening, the right wing of our regiment received orders to move forward and clear the woods in our immediate front. Under the direction of Lieutenant Colonel Moody, we advanced about a half a mile, driving the rebel skirmishers to a line of the Emmitsburg Road. And one last thing from the speech here that I mentioned was given by Captain Herbert. He mentioned the day of the dedication. The uptorn earth where shot and shell plowed great rents has been healed by the green of nature. In place of the thunder of cannons and a rattle of musketry, there now may be heard the rustle of the wind through the leaves and the song of birds. Isn't that a nice sentiment? Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was that this monument was placed here in 1889, but it actually replaced a monument that was at this location previous to that, a monument that just said right here. And this was a monument that had been placed here in 1886. And I'll show this photograph of it. And the monument, the photograph is actually taken behind the monument, looking out across the wheat field road to the wheat field in the distance. And you can actually see the little, one of the outbuildings, I believe, of the Trossel. I think it's George W. Trossel off the top of my head. It's a post-war structure that was not here at the time of the battle, beyond the camera. It was dedicated on October 6, 1886. It was actually dedicated the same day as 3 Massachusetts monuments up on top of the rise of ground behind us along Little Round Top. Sometimes people call this Munshauer's Knoll because Henry Munshauer owned ground up here behind us. But in point of fact, we're still on Little Round Top. Let's call it North Little Round Top. And the monument, like I said, it was dedicated the same day as these 3 Massachusetts units that had arrived here with a large excursion, and John Batchelder was along with them, the government historian, and he attended the ceremony that day. According to our local newspaper, about midnight on October 5th, 100 representatives of the 139th Pennsylvania Regiment came in from Pittsburgh via Hanover and stopped at the McClellan House in the square. So they're trying to indicate here that they did not come on the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad, which had opened up in 1884, 2 years earlier, but they came in from the Hanover Railroad. According to the article, at 2 p.m. on October 6th, headed by the Grand Army Band of this place, the Pennsylvania Party marched to the depot and went by train to the park, meaning they got on the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad and took the spur that led to the backside of Little Round Top, where there was an amusement park. From that place, they went to the site of the 139th monument on the Althoff property near the foot of Little Round Top. And you might know that the house at the end of this farm lane that's very near to us is the Althoff house, which replaced the John T. Weichert house, which was built nearby in the late 1860s. So the Althoff property. Let's see. Colonel Thomas A. Armstrong delivered the introductory address, and Judge F.H. Collier, colonel of the regiment, spoke on behalf of the organization. Vice President David A. Beeler, Esquire, of the Battlefield Memorial Association, responded. And that's interesting because, of course, David Beeler is the postmaster of Gettysburg at the time of the battle, and you might know fled during the fighting and returned afterwards. The monument, the original, is of westerly granite made by the Smith Granite Company and is about 6 feet high and represents the badge of the 6th Army Corps. So you might be wondering, where is that original monument today? Okay, so here it is. This is the original monument to the 139th Pennsylvania Volunteers. And we are actually located now along Sickles Avenue, very close to the peach orchard. So what they ended up doing was, when they put up this monument in 1886, in October of 1886, and then in September of 1889, 3 years later, they put up a new regimental monument at that location, and then the original monument was moved to a secondary location. And this is where this unit charged to on July 3rd, when they drove the rebels back towards the Emmitsburg Road behind the camera position. And a couple interesting things, when they moved it, they had made a mistake. If you look at the photograph here of the monument when it was back there along the Wakert Farm Lane, it said on it, 1st Brigade, 2nd Division, 6th Army Corps. I suspect that, and you know, someone can put this in the comments if they know this, I suspect that at one time they were in that brigade, but at Gettysburg they are not. So they actually hired someone to chisel that out and then recarve 3rd Brigade, 3rd Division, 6th Army Corps, which unit they were in during the Gettysburg campaign. And then they actually had added to the bottom of the monument, advanced near this point, driving the enemy, the evening of July 3rd. So they had that added. And what is really fascinating, in the collections of the Adams County Historical Society, we have the Meals Monument Works papers, and in it is a receipt or a note that Lewis Henry Meals, I suspect around 1890 or 1891, was the man who was contracted to do this, and we'll show the note. Now, Lewis Henry Meals was born in 1860. His father was William Meals, and his father was a stone cutter on York Street at the time of the battle. And so 3-year-old Lewis was in the town during the fighting as artillery shells are flying over his house. And of course, the Union Army retreats through the town. And here he is years later taking over his father and his uncle's monument works, and he's making the correction to this monument. His uncle was George Washington Meals, and he was actually had gone to Washington, D.C., joined the United States Regular Army in 1861, and at the Battle of Gettysburg, he was with Company F, or Battery F, 4th U.S. Artillery, Ruggs Battery. And part of that artillery brigade had sent some artillery to Culp's Hill during the fighting, and George Washington Meals claims that he was part of a section of that battery on Culp's Hill. And according to an article written years later by one of the Meals, I think by Henry Meals, Williams and George's brother, that during the battle, George wanted his family to know that he was present. So he actually lobbed a couple shells at his brother's house on York Street and took the chimney of the house off. I think that's a fine how do you do. Remember, if you like all the content that we put on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe.